that's not an uncommon thing to find a business where the owner of the business also owns real estate. So let's use a simple scenario. The founder is a 100% owner of his business or her business, and the real estate is owned in a separate corporation owned by the same individual. Usually when I meet somebody in that position and I say to them, how much rent do you pay from the business to the real estate entity? They'll usually say, I just pay enough to cover the mortgage and the property taxes and maybe some of the expenses. There's usually no profit in the real estate entity. I just put enough money in there to cover those expenses. And when you own both, it really doesn't matter. But if ultimately one of your children inherit the business and the other inherits the business real estate, or your spouse inherits the business real estate and the children inherit the business, now there's a conflict because there's a different party that owns each. And the owner of the real estate is not going to want to just get enough money to cover their expenses. They're going to want to get what the fair market value is of the rent. And then it becomes a fight because maybe the business can't afford to pay fair market rent. But if they don't pay fair market rent, then the person inheriting the business real estate isn't really getting fair value. So then you have an issue. What happens if the person who owns the business real estate wants to sell it? Maybe they say, I want to sell the business real estate. I don't have a formal lease in place with my children who are running the business. I'm going to sell it. Well, maybe it's hard to sell it because maybe it's really designed just for that kind of business. So the children are in a better position because mom, in this particular case, can't really sell the real estate because it's hard to find a buyer. Or maybe it works the other way, that mom sells the real estate and now the children would have difficulty finding another piece of property that would be equipped correctly to run the business. So there could be so many issues, and it usually is between mom and kids, second spouse and children, or brothers and sisters that are inheriting different assets. Well, there's so many provisions to having a shareholders agreement. The obvious ones are a provision, what happens if one of the shareholders were to die? The next one would be what would happen if one of them wants to retire and leave the business prematurely? What happens if somebody does something wrong and you want them fired? How do you deal with that? How do you deal with a disability? Then you have issues like valuation, very difficult, because a lot of times when I take a look at a shareholders agreement and I look at how the valuation was determined, they haven't really looked at the agreement in 10, 15, 20 years, and the valuation is nowhere in line with what the company's really worth today. Or there is a way to determine valuation, but the insurance that the owners have on one another hasn't really been updated in 15 years, and the business is worth $30 million, and they only have insurance based on a $5 million business because they never got around to relook at this. You have issues like disability. It's very difficult to buy insurance to fund a buyout in the event of a disability, so it becomes an unfunded buyout. The partner who's healthy may not be able to afford to pay the owner that amount of money who got disabled. So do you want to keep a business owner who's not contributing, who's disabled as an owner, but you may not be able to afford to buy them out?